Shalom, this is Hakam Yara ben-Emmett with another exciting edition of the Torah Watchman Show. Topic of interest series continuing. Seems to be one of the most popular series I have done so far in the history of my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for my subscribers. Thank you so much for sharing my videos. Thank you for your blogging and interest. Let's get started. The title of this short video is What was the Sanhedrin and its history. I've already done a video about this, but I have some new highlights from the video I've done before. You can check this out in my topic of interest library under videos on the Torah Watchman Show International. Just look on the title for TOI. You'll find the information that's relevant to you when you want to know more about the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin was an ancient Jewish court system going back to, roughly, I would say, at least 57 before the Common Era, right when the Roman Empire invaded Judea. The Great Sanhedrin was the supreme religious body in the land of Israel during the time of the Holy Temple, namely King Herod the Great's temple, or the Second Temple after King Solomon's temple was destroyed. There were also smaller religious Sanhedrins in every town in the land of Israel, like synagogues and things of this nature, small religious courts of rabbinical figures. They didn't use the word rabbi back then. I guess you could loosely call them Talmudists or Pharisees or Sadducees. Those two different denomination breakouts of Judaism during that time. Now, any kind of civil, political, democratic discussions where you have to have voting and a court system, appointees and things like that, that would be done there too. It's very akin to civil government in the United States and towns and cities and things of that nature. That you need to have a affiliated legal system that's subordinate to the governor of the state, and this is what it closely represented, at least for Jews living under Roman occupation. However, these Sanhedrins existed relatively for a brief shorter period of time until the abolishment by the rabbinical patriarchate in about 425 Common Era. By that time, the Roman Empire had converted over to Christianity, was entrenched in the land of Israel, and essentially they expelled the Jews from so-called Palestine, Syria, Philistia during that time, in the 4th and 5th century, and they couldn't organize anything. If the synagogue, they had it in their home, or it was hidden in some way, and that's just the story of the exiled Jews during that era, the diaspora. The earliest record of the Sanhedrin was recorded by the famous Jewish historian Josephus. He wrote of a political Sanhedrin convened by the Romans beginning 57 BCE, before the Common Era. That's 2,057 years ago for those people that don't know these abbreviations. Hellenistic sources generally depict the Sanhedrin as a political and judicial council headed by the country's ruler. The country ruler at that time was King Herod the Great, earlier, between 57 BCE until he died about 6 or 7 BCE, before Common Era, and namely King Agrippa, his son, who followed in the footsteps of his father when his father died. Sanhedrin itself, and I said this in another video, but it's very interesting. Sanhedrin is a word you won't find anywhere in Hebrew lexicon. You will not find it anywhere in the Jewish Bible. However, you'll find it everywhere in the Christian Bible because it's a Hellenistic word. It's Greek, and for any Jew to associate themselves with this word, and there's even a series of tractates called Sanhedrin that's based on that great council per se in the time of Ezra described in ancient Babylon. That was actually not a formal government recognized judicial court per se was more of the study of the Torah and the Talmud. Now, Tarnatic sources describe the Great Sanhedrin as a religious assembly of 71 sages who met in the Chamber of Hewn Stones. Chamber of Hewn Stones was in King Herod's temple, the second temple. Do you imagine having heated political debates, life and death debates inside of the Holy Temple? Inside of the Holy Temple. Just imagine that, okay? That's what was happening. That's what they proved them for themselves to contaminate. The Lord's temple was designed to house literally the soul of God, and also to facilitate animal and grain sacrifices. And of course, once a year, the chief priest would go in the Holy of Holies there. Imagine all the holiness, how it would be disturbed, because supposedly you imagine there's angels there, and you imagine that God's holy footprint is there, but you have all these political debates, yelling, maybe cursing, I don't know. Just use your imagination. Some of this is described very colorful in the New Testament Bible. The Great Sanhedrin met daily during the daytime and did not meet on the Sabbath. Of course, the 7 days holy, or they didn't meet on the Jewish holidays, and it did not meet during times of mandatory periods of fast, like for instance during the contemporary minor holiday of Purim. You have a fast because you want to mirror what that holiday was about. And when people were suffering, it's happy you to be mournful, and it induces teshuva. Not germane. But anyway, it was the final authority on Jewish law. And listen, and any Torah scholar, Hakam, who went against the decisions of the chief rabbinic, per se, there, okay, was subject to be put to death, a capital punishment. They were known as Zaken Mamre, rebellious elders, and you can read about this in the Talmud tractate Sanhedrin 87. So their law was the highway. Their rule was absolute. And if someone debated the chief rabbinate there, or the so-called presidente, they elected them in the highest of positions, echelons of that Sanhedrin judicial council, you could be put to death. Does it sound like censorship? I don't know. Pretty harsh. And I read this recently in the Talmud, but it's just the way things were. When you have a self-appointed, man-made organization like the Sanhedrin, you get away with a lot of things, right? So, the Sanhedrin was led by a presidente, like I mentioned. Someone is appointed it was named after the prince, like in Ezekiel, the Messiah, Mashiach, the prince, they refer to him as prince, all these altruistic, colorful, nobility, all these terms referring to himself as a Nasi, as a prince, someone who you just kiss their hand and all this. Why do you think rabbis have so much power over their congregation today? In Chabad, they're referred to as governors. Then you have Hasidic rabbis that have dynasties, like in Lithuania. So just use your imagination. This is where it came from, that ego was there 2,000 years ago, and it's still present in some rabbinical circles, not all of them, okay? And there was a vice president too, Av Bet Den, okay? Jewish conversions and things of this nature as well. We decided that. Now, the other 69 sages sat in a semicircle facing the leaders. It was unclear whether the leaders included the high priest. I think more than likely the Kohen Gadol would be called for very difficult decisions about the Torah, like if you had confusion over someone offering an impure or unclean animal, like a lamb that was recently sick or infected with something, you would need to have someone come in and weigh in as a witness, per se, on behalf of the Torah, because maybe that'd be a punishment, or the sacrifice would not be received correctly. Okay, so the Sanhedrin judge accused lawbreakers. Okay, like a Hakam, a Torah scholar that got on the bad side of the prince, or the Nazi, but they could not initiate arrest. That was done in the local Roman centurions, the battalions there. They were there. They had the 10th Roman Legion there, literally. There was on Temple Mount in that area 2,000 years ago. They had all those troops there overseeing the temple and all the people going in and out of the temple. Sometimes it was thousands of people during high holidays. Now, they had maybe other people, like Roman officials, that would do arrests. They would probably recommend arrests for, I know this person, we have witnesses. Can you please bring them in for questioning, that kind of thing. So once they were brought in, they had witnesses, minimal 2 witnesses. This is actually in the Torah, this. So make sure that the person is accused of a crime is truly guilty or not, okay? Like a woman accused of adultery, that kind of thing. So there were no attorneys back then, of course. Instead, the accusing witness stated the offense in the presence of the accused, and the accused could call witnesses on his own behalf or her own behalf. So that's interesting. The witnesses would be the legal arbitrators of that rudimentary court system back in that time, 2,000 years ago. The court questioned the accused, the accusers, and the fifth witness. It went back and forth, much like the U.S. court system today, until a verdict can be found or a cleared ruling on someone's guilt or innocence. Now, the Great Sanhedrin dealt with religious and ritualistic temple matters, criminal matters appertaining to the secular court, proceeding in the connection with the discovery of a corpse. Someone that was reported to have been murdered. They found a body. What was the cause of that? Disease, old age, or someone tried to rob the victim. Someone was murdered in jealous rage, whatever. So they discussed all of these things. A lot of these things are covered in the Torah as well, to be honest with you. Also, drawing up the Hebrew calendar and trying, because that calendar, the Hebrew calendar, which was based on the Babylonian time system per se, was used for scheduling court events around the holiday schedule. Imagine the complexity of having a leap year when you have a second month of Adar, for instance. You would have to prepare for that in advance. So that Hebrew calendar had to be updated continually, year after year. Now, in about 30 CE, the Great Sanhedrin suddenly lost its authority to rule on capital punishment. They couldn't stone anyone. They couldn't strangle anyone. They couldn't hang anyone. Whatever those punishments entailed, they couldn't do it anymore. It's probably a change of the Roman emperor, change of policy for Jewish prudence and guidance. Now, after the temple was destroyed in 70 CE, Common Era, so was the Great Sanhedrin. Why? Because the Sanhedrin, foolishly, those people positioned the entire court system inside of that building, and that if that building was a target by the Romans, it burned down, okay, to ashes. So it ended properly in 70 CE. Now, a Sanhedrin in a community known as Yavneh took over many of its functions under the authority of Rabban Gamliel. You may have heard Rabbi Gamliel. There's a lot of documentation on his rulings. Very famous individual during that time. He continued trying to keep the Sanhedrin going. Okay, he was probably a Nasi or prince or high up there. The rabbis in the Sanhedrin served as judges and attracted students who came to learn their oral traditions and scriptural interpretation. From Yavneh, the Sanhedrin moved to different cities in the Galilee eventually ending up in the Roman city of Tiberias. So a lot of things changed after the temple was destroyed. Okay. And by the time Jerusalem destroyed later on in 135 CE, the Bar Kokhba, false Messiah revolt there were no Jews left anywhere in Eretz Israel to speak of, much less the Sanhedrin or court system. Local Sanhedrin consisted of different numbers of sages, depending on the nature of the offenses they dealt with. For example, the maximum number of 71 was denoted for entire tribe, like the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Judah, that kind of thing, the tribe of Manasseh. However, a false prophet or a high priest would also be discussed here when you need that many people there. Appointment of a high priest. So the high priest passed away. His son had questionable ethical or moral standards, and they had a rule on that too. Or someone who was warranted the death penalty for being a false prophet. But again, all they could do at that time after 30 CE is recommended to the Roman governor, hey, we want this person to be crucified. And sometimes the Romans did that for them, since they weren't allowed to execute anyone. Now, again, there were smaller Sanhedrins down to 23, for smaller cases dealing with not capital punishment, but smaller civil and lesser criminal cases like petty theft. Okay. Now, let's talk about King Solomon Temple. I have a point to make. King Solomon Temple was a central religious political hub, but it was not a Sanhedrin. The Great Sanhedrin, the Supreme Jewish Court that I just discussed, did not convene there during his reign. It emerged later in the Second Temple period. So understand, Sanhedrin was a Hellenistic organization or entity that existed for about 100 years during the time of Roman occupation of Judea. Okay, as long as King Herod's temple stood, they had a presence inside the temple that was their base of operations there. Okay. As far as the Torah is concerned, Sanhedrin is not there. Again, the word has a Greek origin. It's Hellenistic in context and view. And it was not, again, just imagine having a 71 rabbis or sages complaining, maybe cursing and yelling, debating all these things. And you know how busy it is, and to say United Kingdom and their parliamentary system, how loud it can get, what the ruckus would be. Can you imagine that in the Lord's temple? Can you imagine that? I don't know how they get away with that, even in the time of King Herod's second temple, but they did. They did. You can read the Christian Bible for history of that. For a Jew, that's probably the most significant aspect of the New Testament is the history there. Okay. Of course, anytime it points back to the Jew Josephus, who was a historian himself, and the writings of Josephus had a lot of that information as well. Okay. Now, Pharisees, back then, they were not called rabbis, but they're called Pharisees. They were called Sadducees. They're the chief rabbinate was known as a Nasi or prince per se, but they were also referred to as Talmudists because that's all they were arguing about. They weren't arguing with unless it's difficult religious case like the Gemara, that kind of thing, that points back directly to Torah. Most of their court cases and the blueprint for what they're ruling in these cases came from the Babylonian Talmud. Now, Pharisees or Talmudists during the time of King Herod, during the Second Temple period, appointed themselves as judge, arbitrators of truth over all of Judea. This was the origin of rabbinical Judaism, and something that caused a lot of pain for my brothers and sisters among the Haredi Judaism. Now, in conclusion, what can we say? In a brief synopsis, we know about the origin of the word Sanhedrin. We know how it was organized, why it was made useful during that time, even though it was not in the Torah that it even should exist. If you ask any Orthodox rabbi about the Sanhedrin or that ancient court system, they'll say, well, it goes back to the Torah because Jethro told Moshe, he recommended, why don't you appoint some people to arbitrate all these in the weeds court cases for you? You cannot do it all because you're an old man. One person cannot take care of 2 million people. So God appointed 70 judges during the time of Jethro and anointed them and then prophesied and gave witness that they were actually appointed by God. They were not appointed by any tribal leaders in Israel during that time. They were not appointed by Moshe or Aaron. They were not appointed by any man. They were appointed by God. And then Moshe and Aaron simply said, Amen, and recognized them. Now, compare that to the 71 Pharisees, per se, that formed the so-called cabinet of the judicial system for the Sanhedrin inside of the temple. The temple was very large, much larger than King Solomon, because it had to accommodate all these politicians, per se, and it was very political in the Greco-Roman world of that time. So you consider that you have something that is appointed by God on one hand, and something that is appointed by men. And when men appoint themselves and promote themselves into grandiose titles, you have problems of ego and hubris, and maybe narcissism. But the bottom line is the temple was destroyed, and so was the Sanhedrin, and they were scattered out throughout the world. And that's why we have so many synagogues throughout the world, in the Middle Ages and up to now, because all these many Sanhedrin's court system are in there, and rabbis have autonomy over these synagogues. Consider in Chabad, they're known as governors. If you are an ultra-Orthodox Jew, a rabbi, you have a dynasty like in Lithuania. You have a lot of command and control over those people. Why? Because the Jews foolishly gave up their minds and their choices and their lives to these rabbis to rule, and hopefully it was for the better, but a lot of times it was not for the better, okay? Because they used Talmudic judicial ruling based on the Sanhedrin, literally, or the Great Assembly in Babylon in time of Ezra. Who knows? But they used all of these things to make decisions on Jewish conversion, who is a Jew. They made the decisions on that you're only a Jew if you're born through a Jewish mother instead of the father that's predominant throughout the entire Torah and tribal Israel. Anyway, take care. Hakam Yara ben-Emmett signing out until the next time. Shalom Aleichem. God bless you.
If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.